Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. I'm Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. Here with me today, a face a lot of you recognize, Heff.
Hey!
How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you for the annual invite back. It feels so good to be back home here with you.
So good. So a lot of our listeners actually know who you are, but some people might be new. Welcome if this is your first time. So happy that you joined us. If you are a regular listener, thank you. I really appreciate all of the people who reach out and tell me how much they appreciate that we do this. I appreciate that you listen. And Heff, tell them about you, what you do, because if you're not listening to Heff's show, you might enjoy that as well.
Well, Jen, first of all, you put together a great show every week, you and Hunter and the entire team here. Thank you for the invite. I am the deputy CISO for SecurityMetrics, and my job is to manage a lot of the threat hunters that we have here and find the bad guys and notify our clients when we find those bad guys in the environment.
Do you know, that's awesome that you're here today, because our last episode, we actually had one of the threat hunters, Noah, on. If you haven't listened to that one yet, it was a great episode. Noah has a lot of knowledge, and he's the one of the people on your team.
Yeah, he does a great job, and I'm excited about this week's topic, this episode, finding the top breaches, talking about the top breaches.
Oh my gosh, okay. There's always that little bit of a, what is it about humans? We have that thing where we kind of enjoy other people's, there's a word for it.
Schadenfreude?
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
So yes, this is the time of year where we enjoy our Schadenfreude and talk about top breaches of 20. And we don't enjoy it at all, actually. But it's good to know what happened, because then we can maybe plan for and prevent things within our own sphere of influence for next year. So we were like, okay, how are we going to group this?
Yeah.
Is it by month? Is it by impact? Or is it? But you know what we decided to go with? Themes.
Yeah. It's the perfect type of conversation because there have been major themes that have carried through many of these breaches, Jen, that have happened in this past year, 2022.
Yeah.
And a lot of breaches. We don't have time to talk about all of them.
No. But
there are a few that just knocked our socks off.
Yes, and they follow along a few themes that we'll introduce them as we go.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth starting out though with a little bit of a preface. Let's help people kind of give a little context, starting with data breach, data leak, cyber attack. What can you kind of help us understand the similarities and differences there?
Yeah, and for the purpose of today's talk, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about both data breaches, data leaks, and all of these kind of fall under a cyber attack type of banner. So,
right.
And data breaches, where you talk about a threat actor gets into a company or a business, and they try to just get that sensitive data. They try to get that PII. They try to find something of value and extract it from the system.
Yeah.
Leaks, on the other hand, are kind of the opposite, where you just have unknowingly exposed data. And sometimes it's purposeful, where you have an insider threat. And we had a couple of those this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got some of those happening. But you know what's amazing is the amount of data and the amount of accounts that have been just breached this past year.
How many were there?
Well, we know that in 2021, we had about, in total, we tracked about 5.9 million accounts were targeted through data breaches.
That is so many.
And it's expected that at the end of 2022 that we will surpass that number. That's amazing that we can have that many breaches.
That is a lot of breaches.
Yeah,
and
a lot of data.
Well, and it affects so many people individually, and it affects so many organizations, their company, their reputation, their bottom line.
Yeah. And there's been a couple times where, for us in the Security Operations Center at SecurityMetrics, we take it really personal.
Yeah.
When kids are attacked, when elderly, people that just are not aware sometimes of all these different types of social engineering campaigns. So that really impacts our, emotional status sometimes. And we try not to get too emotional about it. But yeah, there's been so many insane breaches this year and a lot of themes that we definitely can talk about.
Let's start with theme number 1, which is the lapsus breaches. And people might be going, the what?
The what? Yeah, lapsus. Do you remember these guys? They were these young kids, these teenagers from Great Britain.
Yeah.
Remember that 17-year-olds that were just going out and they were just causing havoc. And they had popped a lot of big name companies. And the one kid got actually arrested. And that was really cool to see that happen after the fact. But there were some really big companies in there. And it kind of started off in January of this past year with Okta. And for the audience, Okta is a really big vendor. I mean, Like a lot of companies use Okta.
Yep, a lot of people are probably familiar, at least with the name, because they know their companies use it. They might not be really familiar with what Okta does, but because of its where it is situated in that business model, a lot of groups use it.
And what happened in this case, well, what Okta is, by the way, if you're not familiar with Okta, it's kind of like a single sign-on type company where they offer those kind of services to businesses. So a lot of big businesses use them. But with what happened is this Lapsus group is they went in and they socially engineered a contractor, a third-party vendor from this company named Cytel, who was contracted through Okta to handle some of their business. And that's where it went off the rails. And the crazy thing about that breach is the Lapsus, these teams, it only took them 25 minutes to basically hit just 2 customers. And then from there, they just went in and started doing configuration changes, password resets, changing people's MFA, impersonating. It just went crazy from there.
Wild how much they were able to do in a very short time.
And that's kind of that keys to the kingdom type of attack.
Yeah.
And you think about it, like if you get into Okta's environment and you get in past somebody's single sign-on, you can now do whatever you want, steal whatever you want. And that's exactly what Lapsus did here. But then they pivoted. And as soon as they got done with that attack in January, they went into their next big breach, which was the NVIDIA thing.
Yeah, and that was a pretty significant attack that they did. NVIDIA, again, massive company.
Big.
Probably everybody's heard of them. So they make those are the chips. Right?
Yeah. For the video cards, and they were upset, and Lapsus was upset that NVIDIA was putting these limiters on the video cards that were used for crypto mining. And a lot of people were using NVIDIA video cards to mine cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And the NVIDIA folks said, oh, no, we don't want our cards to be used to mine crypto. Please stop. So they put these limiters in place. And of course, Lapsus said, no, that's not allowed. We're gonna pop you guys. And they went in there and they just, man, you want to talk about brand damage time?
Yeah.
Like, And NVIDIA handled this so poorly. You talk about lessons learned. They came out and they said, "Oh no, we weren't breached at all. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along."
Yeah. Then some information was leaked.
And then Lapsus got real smart about it. They're like, we're gonna put some stuff out there." Yeah. And then NVIDIA's like, oh no, please. Lapsus went into like beast mode on this attack. They something like 1 terabyte of NVIDIA's source code was taken. Credentials, 71,000 employees' passwords. Just incredible. And then to make matters worse, Jen, the website Have I Been Pwned? They came out and they reported these credentials being stolen, and now NVIDIA's like, oh, okay, now we got to backtrack, and now we got to own up to it.
I mean, you can lie about it, but then if the people who are breaching you are like, we don't like it when you lie, so now we're going to tell everybody that you did, and by the way, we still don't like you, and so we're going to do more things to you.
Yeah. And now, staying with this theme of Lapsus, like it's not done, folks. We're going to keep going here. You fast forward to like September of this past year, Lapsus was behind the Samsung data breach, allegedly. Yeah. And this is where this one didn't get a lot of play in the news. And it really bothered me, Jen, because this is where we're talking about the source code for Samsung phones. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you talk about private keys and login data and their AWS, their GitHub, their Google keys all being stolen, and then Samsung's like, oh, it's no big deal. No, another again, one of those like NVIDIA type things where nothing to worry about, folks. It was crazy to us that work in the industry how simple yet effective Lapsus tactics were. I mean, you're talking some basic, simple social engineering type work that's done, and then Lapsus is in the environment and they do their homework. I mean, these 17-year-old kids, they knew what they were looking for, what they were going for. As soon as they found it, they got out, and I believe that it wasn't published till September, but this actual this breach happened back in July, and here it was, a month and a half later, 2 months later, that we're finally getting word of the 190 gigabytes of data that's been stolen from Samsung, which is a tremendous amount of.
And you know what's kind of heartbreaking about this size of data breach is that people are getting almost used to hearing about it, and I start hearing about this from people. Oh, my data's already been breached, so what can you do about it? Like, people are almost getting kind of nihilistic about it, which
Yeah.
is not good.
No, not at all. I had a bunch of friends that told me, I'll never buy a Samsung phone ever again. Just like that. All right. And I said, well, you got to do what's best for you. But the way it was handled by both of these companies, Samsung and NVIDIA, just, big hardware-based companies that are getting their source code leaked.
Yeah.
Just heartbreaking. But it didn't stop.
And you can tell a lot about a company and whether you will continue to do business with them based on their reaction to a breach.
Yeah.
So just because somebody's had a breach doesn't mean you never do business with them again. Really, the answer is, how did they communicate it? How quickly? What did they put in place afterward? What are your reassurances going forward? Because otherwise you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Yeah. And that's a great point to bring up too, the arrogance and gall of some of these companies and the way they handle the breaches. But, we did have a good shining light in all of this situation. One of the breaches that hit was Lapsus actually went after Microsoft.
Yeah.
And that happened, I want to say it was kind of March 22nd, around that time frame this year, that Microsoft got hacked. And this one was really unique in that the way that Microsoft handled this breach, they have a very excellent cybersecurity team. And they came out right away and they said, hey, our security team is on it. We're handling it. They had this incredible response. The PR was just handled excellent from start to finish.
And this is a really important point that you're making, because a lot of organizations, part of their breach response is all about what are we going to do from a technical perspective? But they don't think about the communication piece. The communication piece is extremely important, not just internally to whatever organization has been experiencing the breach, but externally. Who is allowed to talk to law enforcement? Who is allowed to talk to the news? Who is allowed to post about it? And who is responsible? Who is supposed to? Like, at what point do they do these things? How does this communication happen? When you're under the stress of an actual breach that's happening in real time, these are not easy decisions to make. It's the worst time to make those decisions. But if you have a team that's already thought about it and done these kind of wargaming aspects.
Yeah, the tabletop exercise.
Yeah.
Microsoft, you could tell Microsoft was ready for this type of attack. And they had the processes in place. They had the playbooks. They knew how to respond. Everybody knew their role and executed the role to perfection. And this was not a simple breach, by the way, of Microsoft. We're talking about Lapsus compromised Cortana, Bing, several products that Microsoft owns. And again, they handled it really marvelously in how they were able to come out and say, hey, only one account was compromised. We took care of it, and they overly shared some things from this breach and their lessons learned with the public. Again, really marvelous way to respond.
And I think that's a really that's not only is it generous of some of these really prepared companies to help other people learn, but it shows the level of confidence that they have in themselves to be able to meet and respond to some of these things.
Yeah. And, we kind of pivot from that Microsoft breach. Now, some people would argue that Apple and the Meta owned by Facebook Meta, whatever you want to call it, they got breached this year. Both of those companies got breached. Huge companies, right? Apple and Meta. Allegedly, what happened was, we're talking apparently like March of 2022 is when this went down. And again, two of the world's largest tech companies, allegedly Lapsus was behind this. And what was unique about it is they were pretending to be law enforcement officials, and they would send out announcements, hey, we need information about these particular customers. We need their addresses, their phone numbers, their IP address. And they were able to really get in there and use these fake law enforcement announcements to get access to this data.
Right. And I often say that people who are going to respond to phishing attacks typically are the people who are trying to do the right thing. And so when it's fake law enforcement and you're trying to respond the right way, there's still, you can be that helpful, person that's doing the right things in the right way. But also in your companies, if there is a way to access critical information that only one person can give that access to, You need to change your processes.
Right. And that's where the question came in with this one. And thematically, folks, we could have probably made this its own category. You're talking about law enforcement being tricked, being socially engineered, ISPs being socially engineered to getting these fake announcements saying you need this information. And I thought what was really cool is this year, Krebs on Security, the website, Krebs on Security.
Fantastic. If you're not following Krebs, just definitely recommend.
He was all over this, folks. I mean, he was on top of like how this actually works, how it goes down, the technical aspects of this type of social engineering. But there has been discussion, and I have seen information about how law enforcement now are putting in processes to stop this type of trickery, this type of social engineering. But again, lapsus allegedly behind the Apple breach, the Meta breach, and a bunch of ISPs also got hit by these types of breaches. But that is really the theme number one is lapsus.
This episode is brought to you by SecurityMetrics Shopping Cart Monitor Inspect. It's a revolutionary new product that can help you detect any problems with your shopping cart security, allowing you to effectively improve your e-commerce security. Here's what I know about it. A lot of times people say, well, hey, I am PCI compliant because I passed my SAQA. Great. You're missing most of the things that people are actually stealing information from right now. Shopping Cart Monitor was created to actually close those gaps and help you against things like MageCart and other known e-commerce issues. To learn more about this shopping cart monitor, head to our website, securitymetrics.com. But it kind of, that last conversation kind of fades us into the second theme, which is that social engineering, phishing theme.
It doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop.
And the tactics.
Because it's so effective.
Oh my gosh, the tactics. Jen, the tactics have been so unreal this year. We actually do a weekly threat briefing for all of our employees, and we always kick it off with the latest phishing tactics.
Love it.
For the employees. And I got to tell you, folks, if you're only doing phishing training one time per year, it's not enough. All right? You have to, literally... You have to have somebody on top of this that is seeing the news and grabbing the latest types of phishing lures, these phishing emails, and is just ready to share it with employees because it's that fast of a changing tactic.
Yeah.
That's out there.
And I have colleagues that even from their personal email will send it to me and say, this looks like phishing to me. What do you think? And I'll say, yes, it is.
Right.
Because they're right. But also sometimes you can't tell. And then you have to say, all right, if you can't tell if it's phishing, then you can't risk that. Find another way to verify the information. Yeah. So it creates that conversation in what's out there. How do you recognize it? And one time a year certainly is not enough.
No. And, we talk about the different phishing breaches that have happened this past year. The one that really popped the news big, it blew up in September, but it was Grand Theft Auto, the video game Grand Theft Auto. Yeah. The new one's coming out at some point, and the company's called Rockstar that makes it, and they got breached. And it was so fascinating how this breach went down with social engineering. They didn't send a phishing email, folks. What they did is they went on and they figured out that they had basically third-party people that work for the company that were using Slack. Slack is like that messaging platform. Yeah. And the threat actor went in and said, I'm just going to compromise the Slack account. And then from there, pivot into Rockstar's environment and then steal whatever I find of value.
Sneaky.
And you know what they stole? The video game source code for the newest game, Grand Theft Auto. Yeah. And they put out the video clips of it. What the new game looks like. Yeah. They put out some of the source code. This type of attack, you talk about cyber awareness training. Constant for third parties. If you have contractors in your environment, you need to make sure they're also going through cyber awareness training.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it brings to more awareness to communication platforms, to communication tools that people are using. They might not think, oh, well, you can't use this to log into that. It doesn't matter. The communication is there and you can leverage it because it is a trusted source of communication. Yes. And so people say, oh, well, it must be, I can talk through here. But because they may not have thought of how it could be used in order to breach other places in their organization.
And that was crazy too. Again, the bad guy is pivoting through Slack, a third-party communication tool that the business probably said, well, everybody else is using it, so it's got to be fine. They probably didn't do their cyber due diligence on it and figure out that maybe it's not the best tool, but they allowed it anyway in their environment. And here it is, social engineering. But the bad guys didn't stop with Rockstar. Yeah. They actually went after Uber too. And Uber is on our bad list of some of the worst breaches that have happened this past year. And I'll tell you why, folks. The same tactics as the Rockstar. They basically figured out that they can get in. They call these type of breaches a total compromise.
Yeah, the Uber one was so bad.
The entire code repository, their cloud storage at Uber, all of that, again. And the way it was done through a staff member at Uber, their Slack account got breached through social engineering. And then the threat actors got into Uber's environment.
Right, and I think this brings up, again, that point that if you have social engineering phishing training, if you have that training, it doesn't matter.
No.
You have to look at what is each individual role. What could they, as an individual, do if they get tricked?
Yeah.
Or if they get compromised? What if suddenly they get offered a whole lot of money? Like, there's a lot of reasons why somebody might give up their credentials, not just being tricked. And so you have to think, all right, what other tools are in place that prevents, either through process or through multi-factor or through other alerting means? How do you prevent any single individual from in some way compromising that environment?
Yeah. And I think Uber and a bunch of the other companies that did get breached this year, they went out and they said, well, we're going to look at other methods of authentication and going beyond use of password managers and single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. They had talked about doing things like biometric authentication and implementing that kind of stuff to give them less opportunities for the bad guys to get in.
Right. And it's driving people more towards the zero trust architecture, where just because you have privileged credentials doesn't mean you have access to everything at all times.
Yeah. And it's that, access, least privilege access, only get access to what you actually need to perform your job in support of the business. So,
exactly.
And it's got to be a priority. It's got to be a mindset to evolve companies' cyber posture. And for some companies, they're still not there yet. But
the Uber breach wasn't just a total compromise. They are not on our good list for other reasons.
Yeah, and I don't know if many of you recall in the audience, but back in November of 2017, Uber got breached. Okay, but it wasn't until July 2022 where Uber finally had to come out and make an announcement about this. And we're talking...
That's 5 years.
Right?
5 years.
A cover-up. It was a cover-up, folks.
Yeah.
And the CISO was the one doing the cover-up. And essentially what happened was their CISO is this guy, former CISO now, Joe Sullivan.
What?
He had to go to trial. And it finally made it to trial in July of this past year from back in November 2017. And it's really the first instance that we know of where a executive, a CISO, is being brought on charges for failure to do his responsibility for this data breach.
He's going to jail.
And he's going to jail, yeah. And boy, that is the one thing. This kind of just blew my mind in how they covered it up, because they get breached, and then the CISO says, "Well, let's just pay them, but let's pay them through the bug bounty program." So that's how he hid it, right? And he said,
"So audacious."
Yes, he said, "Hey, this is bug bounty program. We'll use it to be the cover-up tool. That we did get breached, but it wasn't really a breach. It was these guys found some bugs in our environment, and we'll just pay them out through that way." And then the audacity of the CISO, Joe Sullivan, he leaves Uber and he goes work for another big tech company as a CISO, and then again he goes back on trial this past year, and he's going to jail.
Did he just not think he was going to get caught? Did he not think it was a big deal? Was he? What was? Oh, I'll just leave this company, and then wipes the slate clean, and I go to the next company.
It's surreal. I mean, this story is one of those things where you go, wow, probably my top cyber story of the year.
Yeah.
If I had to summarize the top 10, just the way this all went down.
Unbelievable.
And I think it was like 57 million Uber users were impacted by this breach, by the way.
Well, but Uber wasn't the only.
No, and there are so many social engineering type things. Dropbox this past week, or this past month of November, they got breached, a phishing attack. Again, the phishing attacks are unreal. The tactics are unreal. This particular data breach was pretty severe, Jen. 130 GitHub repositories, all that code for Dropbox was copied, including their API credentials were also stolen.
Yeah, and when they originally happened, they said, "Oh, nobody's information got breached," but it feels like that's not the important part of this story.
No. And if I had to say what is the most important part of the story, it comes down to cyber awareness and cyber training. And the way this went down is the threat actor created a fake login page and then tricked the Dropbox employee to be clicking on it. And then I did not like the way that Dropbox responded to this.
No.
They put out one of these statements, these blanket statements. No one's content, no one's passwords, no one's payment information was accessed.
So weak.
I don't like those kind of statements. I want them to change the statements.
But they take your security really very seriously.
Yeah. And by the way, you're getting 2 free years of.
Yeah. I mean, so what else can you ask for?
Their investigation found that it was the API keys mostly used by Dropbox developers. Okay, I get that. But that's, again, a keys to the kingdom type of attack.
It is.
Where now you have lost the API key, you have lost all that code, and it's out there in the wild. And I'll tell you, Jen, I wish this was taken a little bit more seriously because this is the kind of stuff, this should never have happened. All right. These fake login pages that we see all the time. The big one that's in the news right now is LinkedIn being used. There's a fake email saying, hey, you need to verify your credentials.
Yeah. Or you'll lose your account.
Or you'll lose your account. Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. Anytime there's something that makes you worked up or anxious or fearful or like a call to action in that moment.
Don't click.
Don't do it.
Yeah. And, Twitter's another one right now. Twitter just got sold to Elon Musk. They're taking it private. And now they're talking about having to verify your account. And all these threat actors are doing the same thing. They're saying, hey, I'm going to send out a bunch of fake phishing emails that requiring Twitter users to verify their account.
Yeah.
Same thing done with this Dropbox
Don't
attack.
do it.
You verify your account.
And look how effective that is. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of emotion around that whole Twitter space right now. And so people are going to be overreactive and they're not going to be thinking well. And that's when phishing really works.
Yeah.
So my advice to people is don't do anything for a minute. Just be patient. Hang on. If you really love the Twitter sphere and want to be part of that, don't react to anything that's coming to you for a minute.
Another thing that's interesting about the Dropbox breach is their response, and one of the responses, we're going to change some of our processes, and we're going to require employees now to use hardware authentication keys in order to access their accounts, which I think is really cool. I mean, they can obviously afford it to get everybody a key, but that it's a really cool the way when breaches happen, the responses and the changing of the tactics by the employees and how we're going to change things, make things different.
You're very kind, because my response was, you weren't already doing that?
Yeah,
when you have access to all of their information in Dropbox. I never use Dropbox because I just have never had a good feeling about it.
I never had a good feeling. I never used it either. So.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. Hey, high five. Very nice. Yes.
Well, so in addition to Dropbox, let's move on to another one that's also a phishing. And this one kind of hurts because, airlines.
Yeah, I'd never like to see an airline get popped.
No.
It bothers me a lot. And I don't even use American Airlines, and they did get breached this past year. I believe it was in September where they made this big announcement. A lot of breaches happened in like the early part of the year, like January, February, March. And then it really was like around September, August, June, where now these companies, these incident response teams, they have a chance to investigate, and now they make their announcements. And it always seems to follow in line with when the financials get announced.
Yes.
Right? We'll wait till after the stock and the stock announcements get announced.
Feels like that almost feels like lying.
It does, doesn't it? But it's interesting with the American Airlines breach. Again, it was another phishing attack, and this time it was really one of the more advanced tactics was used. What's fascinating, Jen, is about phishing attacks. 70%, I've heard this number, 70% of cyber attacks target business email accounts. That makes sense, right? I mean, you're going to go after a business, you're going to probably go after their employees and their employee business account.
Yeah.
And that's where staff needs to be so vigilant and aware. And again, we keep harping on this cyber awareness training, but the understanding the phishing tactics are changing so rapidly and fast, you can't wait a year to do another round of phishing training for your team.
No, exactly. And not only that, the fact that you could break in just by just from a phishing thing, what other tools were in place to prevent and detect and stop these attacks?
Yeah,
probably insufficient attack.
And I want all the people in the audience to put yourself in the zone of an airline employee. You're rushing to your gate. You're getting into the office. You don't have much downtime, right? And you're checking your email on your phone. These folks are the ones that are going to be prime targets because there's a sense of urgency to get the job done. I'm just going to click on this email. I'm going to see where it takes me. And now I have given access. And it's critical infrastructure. We're talking airlines are critical. You've got to have a plane that gets compromised. Boy, that's real bad stuff.
It is bad stuff. You know what else is I don't know if you're, just to side note it, CISA is now, there's a new law saying, hey, if you're part of critical infrastructure, you have to now be reporting these breaches in certain ways.
Wonderful.
And yes, it was very, very recent, and we should probably do some kind of a episode on it. But I think it's going to encourage some of these, like airlines, to be more aware, because when you have to report something, you don't want to do that, right? So it's one thing to prevent it, but also I want to prevent and not report it to somebody. Healthcare industry is also considered critical. Infrastructure.
Absolutely.
So hopefully the new reporting guidelines are going to encourage people to think that far ahead. What if a phishing attack happens? Who do I have to talk to about it? It's pretty important that the right people know.
There have been a lot of breaches that have hit critical infrastructure and that we're not going to talk about today. We just don't have time.
We don't. Yeah, there's so many.
The one that caught me in the news was last week. There was a Denmark train system that went down. And it was the thing about this attack was a lot of times when critical infrastructure gets hit, it's usually like the scheduling system. It's the things, the stuff behind the scenes, not so much the operational technology that keeps the trains running or the planes running.
Right.
And the Denmark case last week, the Denmark breach, the train system's operational technology went down. Literally the software that controls the trains. And that's the kind of stuff you fear with like American airline breach. You don't want the software that runs the airlines to go down. You don't want the train systems to go down. Trains and planes, you want them running.
You would actually, especially if you're on them.
Right? But there were other breaches, and we don't want to...
Hey, before we leave phishing, I want to talk about, I don't know if this is my favorite or my least favorite, the Verizon data breach.
Yeah, that was a big one, too. And, Verizon, they're big in our industry, folks. They put out this annual report called the DBIR report.
Yes.
And they're one of those kind of companies, they don't just do cell phones. A lot of people have it misconstrued. They just do cell phones.
Yeah, nope.
No, they do more than that, folks. They do cybersecurity as well.
It's huge.
So for them to get breached, and this was, again, another social engineering scam where an employee was convinced to give remote access to the threat actor. And in this situation, a database full of names, email addresses, phone numbers, a large number of Verizon employees were caught up in this breach. Again, bad stuff, folks. And again, it all comes down to social engineering. And that really is, there's been a lot more social engineering breaches, but that is really the highlight reel of the top ones that have happened.
And there's so many that we could go through, but I want to hit another theme before we before we spend all our time on social engineering, and that is dev environment security.
Yeah, we never talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
No. And, I don't know how it is with your clients, but I always see, my perception is a lot of clients overlook this part of their environment.
So to be, I'm going to be quite frank here, and software development is something that when it affects the security of the data that we're looking at from a third party perspective, what are you trying to protect? And if they have third party, or if they have software development that they're doing, that is definitely one of the things we looked at. And sorry, development teams, please don't be mad at me for saying this. These tend to be some of the most kind of arrogant people.
Whoa.
They don't want, And it's very difficult to say, hey, not the good ones are great, and we'll talk to you about security all day long.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that spectrum, it's almost like a polar thing where they are quite good at what they do, and sometimes that brings a sense of arrogance to people. And the ones who don't understand their potential effect on security can really cause problems. And they'll say things like, it's just the dev environment.
Yeah. And, historically, though, with a dev environment, a lot of these folks are under pressure. They're under the gun.
Yeah.
I got to get the code done. I got to get it pushed out.
And so I'm not trying to be critical of them as an entire group, but this is kind of a theme that I have encountered on quite a few occasions. And so I really want to warn people, if you really want to be great at development, but security is part of it. It just is.
Yeah.
And the good teams who bring security into the conversation, they're doing it the right way.
They do. They are. And to our colleagues in the dev world, I think it's important that we understand that it's a third-party environment oftentimes, and the threat actors realize that if they can pivot from the dev environment through your third party into your environment, they're going to try to do that. So it's not just the dev environment, though. And this theme that we're talking about here is bad cyber hygiene, bad security posturing, not knowing your environment and not scanning your environment, not knowing what assets are in that environment.
Right.
That's huge. So we had a couple examples. And the one that caught my eye the most, I actually had a friend at LastPass that it was there when this breach went down in August.
No.
Yeah. And, he called me up and he said, I think I'm leaving them. And he literally put in his notice the next day. He says, "I'm gonna go away from this company." This happened in that the password manager LastPass, if you ever used it, it's very popular. A lot of people love LastPass. The threat actor gained access to their dev environment using a developer's compromised endpoint, and that's how they got in. And this method really, once the threat actor gets in, it's persistent access, impersonate the developer, and then find whatever keys to the kingdom they want and exfiltrate and get it out of there.
Do you know, this is one of the reasons that we look so carefully at the separation of duties. Not just am I allowed to be in the production environment, am I allowed to be in the database environment, but can my credentials that I use in my dev environment also be used in these other environments? They shouldn't be, because that's one of the ways that you can shut down an attack that comes through the dev environment, is that your credentials actually cannot be used outside of the dev environment.
And what's neat about this is we talk about bad cyber hygiene, and that is, we have employees sometimes that like to reuse passwords.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have that problem in your company, you need to really come up with a solution, policies, and require the password changes. But so often that happens where employees will reuse their Netflix password for their work password. And, threat actors know that. They go online on the dark web, they buy the Netflix compromised passwords.
And what's agonizing is when Netflix gets compromised. I don't know if they did, but you know what I'm saying. And then they send out a thing and say, change your password. Okay, but I don't care if you change your Netflix password. It's already been breached. What I care about is, are you using that password someplace else?
And they are. That's the reality.
That's the one you should be changing.
Yeah, and how many times we keep talking about cyber hygiene? You got to know also your security posture of your dev environment. And I see that so often where these third parties, and you may not even have a dev environment in your business, but the reality is you probably have a contract or a vendor that you're using that maybe does not have a secure dev environment. So that's one of those type of things where you can ask those questions right up front before you do business with this vendor or this third party. Hey, how do you secure your dev environment? And ask those kind of questions up front.
Yeah, so. I'll bet Australian Telecom wish they had asked those questions.
They're another one that got popped. And, it wasn't just one of the companies. It wasn't just Singtel that got popped. It was also Optus. Yeah. And it was weird the way this one went down, because it was like back to back. It was like the threat actor knew, I get in to Optus, I breached them in October, and that was something like 9.7 million subscribers. And by the way, this Australian telecom company, it was like the largest ever across the entire. This Massive. Is like their version of AT&T and Verizon. And then their subsidiary Singtel got breached in October. 129,000 customers, 23 businesses. We don't have a lot of details yet on this breach. It's still being investigated. We know that it was potentially a state-sponsored group that went in there trying to get the sensitive information. What I found interesting about this breach in Australia, these two breaches in Australia, is what's coming out of it. And the Australians, they love cybersecurity. The government of Australia, they put forth effort and energy to enact new laws. They were talking about some kind of maybe national passport system, I believe it was called. They're trying to do different things to protect the businesses that run and operate within Australia. So this is going to be really interesting, the lessons learned that come out of this breach. Well,
what else have we got in this dev-related breach set?
Yeah, the Twitter data breach was kind of weird. Some people are saying it didn't happen. Some people are saying it did happen. 5.4 million accounts. This was back, I believe, in July is when it hit the news.
I think if there's anything that we can learn from Twitter from this year is that it is weird and chaotic.
It is. And, that's a huge footprint. You want to talk about a gigantic footprint that needs to be protected. Yeah. Huge. A lot of patching has to be done there. And in this case, it was a vulnerability that a threat actor actor was able to take advantage of. Again, that's what threat actors do. They find open doorways. Yep. We had a couple situations this year where the threat actor folks, they're always out there scanning environments. They're always looking for doorways in. And we had a situation where we had a client that had left a firewall port open. And the client or the threat actor got in within 30 minutes. And the customer was like, oh, I was just going to leave it open for, just to work on it for
just a minute.
Yeah, just a couple minutes. And the threat actor got in that fast within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Same thing here with Twitter. You got to be doing the patching. You got to be doing the vuln management. You've got to be on top of that cyber hygiene type stuff. And when you have a huge footprint like Twitter does, woo. Yeah.
Okay, so here's another one. Giant.
Yeah.
Mega. Huge. VPN breach.
People love their VPNs.
Yes.
And there were 3 big VPNs that got popped. You and I think we had done an episode last year where we talked about VPNs being breached, and it's still going. The theme is still there. Threat actors know that people love their VPNs. They know that if they can get in there, they make them
feel secure.
Yeah.
Make them feel, like they can not be observed in that.
And this is really not the first time. I mean, this type of stuff's going to keep happening. If you love your VPN, that's great. Be aware who you choose as your vendor.
And here's the thing: is if it's free, it's not so good.
And Super VPN, Gecko VPN, Chat VPN, all of these companies are being breached. We're talking 21 million users.
Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use a VPN. I actually think you should use a VPN, especially if you're on an insecure network.
But do your due diligence on who you choose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes free is not always free. And this one was huge when you talk about all the data stolen. Damage is done now, folks. I mean, your password's out there. Your information's out there.
Make sure you're not using that same passwords other places.
Yeah. I thought the other breach that caught my eye and attention, switching gears, Jen, is the cache send breach.
Yeah.
This was an insider threat. And you don't hear a lot about these insider threat breaches, but we did. And that's why I want to talk about it too, because Cash App, very, very popular app. It's one of those things where they allegedly treat their employees not that well. And an employee said, I'm not going to stand for this. I am going to take customer names. I'm going to take the stock trading information. I'm going to take account numbers, portfolio values. 8 million customers were impacted by this type of breach. And it's all about treating your employees well, and the employee did not feel like that. They felt like they were disrespected. You got to have good cyber hygiene, though, with ex-employees.
But the other thing is you can actually be treating people well and they can take it wrong.
They could.
And so it is, I think you should be treating your employees well anyway.
Yeah.
But also assume that no matter what you do, somebody on the inside is going to try and hurt you. And so what kind of tooling do you have in place to know that it's happening, to prevent it from happening, and to limit its reach when it does happen?
And in this case, with cyber hygiene, we're talking about here deactivating old employee credentials. And so often we think that, we deactivated their master login account, but then they forgot that the employee has access to all these other tool sets that nobody went in and deactivated, and that's exactly what this employee did. So you got to know what the back doors are that employees have access to. You got to have a good digital asset to know to deactivate those accounts. So,
well, man, we could just go on and on, but we've covered a lot of data breaches. Is there any favorite one you want to cover before we close?
I think I do. I want to make sure that we understand the lessons learned. There's some overarching themes.
Okay.
And what you can take away from all these breaches is the same consistent things that we've been talking about for decades. And that's where I want to leave the audience with. I think that you got to realize that human error is a major part of most of these breaches, where the employees, again, not trained, or maybe they are, but it's only one time a year. The cyber awareness training is not there. The teaching of the latest advanced tactics in phishing is not ongoing. Again, 70% of all email compromises are done to the business email account. So the employee has to be able to recognize the danger, has to have that vigilance, that always on, you're always on, right? It's not just the cybersecurity team's responsibility. It's everyone has a part to play in this. I think that's an important part of it. I think also there has to be a business priority of The weak passwords has to go away.
Definitely.
Reusing passwords has to stop. Those kind of behaviors has to be prioritized at the business level. We talk also about the executive in the boardroom, and we didn't really talk too much about that today, but if those folks are not prioritizing cybersecurity decision-making at the board level, and they're not asking the right questions, you're going to continue to see this kind of stuff. We also see a trend, folks, of so many third parties getting popped and breached. And then that doorway is how the bad guy's getting into your environment.
Yeah.
So you got to know what third parties are in your environment.
And how they're affecting it.
Yeah. And do you really need that many doorways? Maybe there's one company out there that can do 3 or 4 or 5 of those things that you need done. SecurityMetrics is a great example of that. We don't just do audits and compliance, we do pen testing, we do security operations, we can find the bad guy too.
And a lot of people know about our audit teams, our pen test teams, those types of things. But since the Security Operations Center is one of the things that we haven't talked about as much.
Right.
I talk to a lot of organizations that are like, hey, we're looking for third-party SOC. Do you know anybody that does that?
Call me.
I'm like, Heff has the answer. So, and I know that you and your team do such a great job because I get to hear that weekly briefing that you do.
Right.
And it's so, well, first of all, it's really fun hearing how you stop the bad guys. That is my favorite part. But also, all the lessons learned. And so I think that's really something that I hope more people understand that this company really does offer that as something to look into. But also another thing is that sometimes people can get overwhelmed by all these breaches.
It is. And with these small teams, if you have a small IT team, you're already up against the wall.
Yeah, it is a lot. And so if you're looking at, well, how do we manage this 24/7? Most organizations, small and even medium companies, they just can't staff that.
No.
And so looking for a third party is a good idea.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is that not every organization is going to be hit in the same way as other organizations. So yes, there are lessons that can be learned, but if you haven't done a risk assessment on the specifics of your environment, what is allowed in, what is allowed out, what is the business that you do, what is the information that you actually hold, if that risk assessment hasn't been done, that you're not going to put the right security controls in place because you don't even know what you're protecting.
Yeah, you got to know your crown jewels.
Yeah, absolutely.
What keeps the business lights on every day? And if you don't know your crown jewels, it's hard to put a plan in place to get that security posture up
Absolutely.
Another level.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to me.
Awesome.
Any last words before we close?
I just thank you for everyone that joins us and is part of this your podcast. You do such a great job.
Oh, I have such a fun time doing it.
It's fun.
It's great being able to talk to people who are really smart and excited about cybersecurity because it is a great industry and I love being part of it.
Thank you for the work.
Thanks again for joining me. Thank you again for joining us here at the SecurityMetrics podcast. I hope that you have taken in all of the last 3 years of our catalog. It's getting pretty huge now. Looking forward to season 4 of this next year. In the meantime, make sure to take a minute to look at the security of your organization. Take a minute to do some risk assessment. Maybe ask yourself, what are the known gaps? And address those. This is the right time of year to do it, and then you can go into the next year with kind of a cleaner cybersecurity posture and looking forward to a better year for all and fewer breaches. All right, you take care. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.